So I'd like to thank you for the generous invitation to speak to you tonight. At the University of Sydney Library, we are privileged to hold one of the largest and most significant rare and special collections in Australian university libraries. And we consider these collections an important resource for the wider community, not just for the university community. So I'm delighted to introduce them to you tonight. I'm going to give you a brief introduction to the collections and my team who steward them, to let you know what we do with our collections and how you can access them. I'll give you some context for our decision to purchase our copy of the Fabrica in 2023, and I'll then showcase this wonderful item in some detail, explaining its significance and the unique details of our copy. If you're interested to see the Fabrica for yourself, there are three options. If you want to come and view it in person, Rare Books and Special Collections is open to the public. Not many people know that, but you can apply online for a free Rare Books and Special Collections Community ID, which allows you to log into the library online catalogue and request to view items in our reading room. We don't take walk-ins, so requests must be made online in advance. And note that it's only for Rare Books and Special Collections. There is a separate paid membership if you want access to the wider library's resources, but access to anything in Rare Books is completely free, and that's important to us. It is fully digitised and available on our digital collections platform on the library website. Anyone in the world can access this high-res copy for free and look through the whole book page by page. We add new material online all the time. There's full search capability, or you can just click on the tile of the item or collection that you want to see. So it allows you to kind of browse and see some of the treasures that we hold as well. Finally, we're subscribed to Google Arts and Culture, which is a platform where you can explore art, culture, and history from around the world through high-res images, virtual tours, and interactive experiences. It features content from over 2,000 cultural institutions in 80 countries, allowing users to delve into museums, archives, libraries, and landmarks. We've started to contribute images from our collections and feature unique items as interactive stories, and the Fabrica is one of them. You can view our story about the Fabrica here. A very brief comment about myself. I am actually from Australia. I was born and raised in Brisbane. I travelled to the UK in 2008 to study for a Master's in Book and Library Materials Conservation. It's too niche a subject to be offered in Australia. After which I undertook an internship at the British Library for 1 year, and then was a conservator at the Bodleian Library at the University of Oxford for 5 wonderful years, working on some of their beautiful and incredible items, including medieval illuminated manuscripts and their copy of Shakespeare's First Folio. Caring responsibility for ageing parents brought my partner and I back to Australia, and I've been manager of Rare and Special Collections at the University of Sydney Library for the past 9 years. Prior to this year, my team consisted of 2 librarians and 1 digitisation assistant. But following a positive staff restructure, we're now rebranded Cultural Collections with 13 people, which is quite amazing. So it encompasses physical Rare Books and Special Collections and digital collections as well. I head up a Cultural Collections curation team, supporting the front-facing use of the collections, both physical and digital, in teaching and research activities, plus a range of publicly accessible events and exhibitions, donor relations activities, visits, talks, and digitisation. Our sister team, Cultural Collections Discovery, takes care of the back-of-house inventory control and cataloguing of the collections, physical processing activities, stock take, and valuation. Together, our teams collaborate to support a range of client services, including visitors to the Rare Books reading room, managing a virtual reading room service, allowing remote and distance users the opportunity to use our items, responding to researcher and client inquiries, collection development via donations and purchases, and preventive conservation or physical stewardship activities, such as environmental monitoring, pest control, security, handling training, archival boxing and housing of the collections, and many more activities like this. And we also host an internship program for master's students at the university. So it's an incredibly busy environment, despite people imagining that we waft around reading rare books all day. We facilitate other people using them, but we rarely get the chance to do this ourselves. That will have to wait for retirement. Having said that, it's an absolute privilege to work with and showcase these collections, which are absolutely stunning and really under the radar. It's our mission to raise awareness about their existence, their significance, and opportunities to engage with them. Peter already alluded to the fact that Rare Books holds over 300,000 items in around 300 separate collections. They're housed on site in 4 collection rooms. Rare Books and Special Collections operates like a separate library within the university library building, which to many is known as the Fisher Library. And very, very briefly, a bootmaker and the son of convicts, Sydney resident in the 1800s, Thomas Fisher became a significant benefactor of the Library of the University of Sydney, which was named Fisher Library in his honour on completion in 1909. This original library in the university's sandstone quadrangle is now known as Maclaurin Hall, and the top 2 black and white photos are the original Fisher Library. Within 50 years of its opening, it was no longer adequate for its purpose, and in 1963, a new building was opened, and the name Fisher Library was transferred to it, maintaining the link between the university library and its most significant benefactor. Below is one of the architectural drawings from the build and a photo of the Fisher Library today. The collections held in Rare Books and Special Collections are difficult to summarise as they are so broad-ranging, but they encompass early medieval manuscripts right through to modern science fiction and artist books. We have books and manuscripts from many different cultures and religions through the centuries. Rare comics, political propaganda, pivotal works in early mathematics, medicine, science, history, literature, and the arts. The process of acquiring books is a consultative one, aiming to select items that are significant in their field or fill identified gaps, bringing a diversity of voices and content to the table, and most importantly, supporting teaching and research at the university and beyond. We have an existing collection strength in the history of medicine, and we're fortunate to collaborate closely with Associate Professor Catherine Story, who you can see in the top photo in the centre. Kate graduated from the University of Sydney in medicine in 1972 and was subsequently the first woman to train in neurology. She was head of the Royal North Shore Hospital Stroke Unit and the Neurology Department there, and later gained a Master of Science in the Department of History and Philosophy of Science. After retiring from clinical practice in 2010, she's devoted her time to archiving and documenting the history of medicine at the Royal North Shore Hospital, the Sydney Medical School and the University of Sydney. During that time, she's curated several large exhibitions with us on various themes, exploring the history of medicine using our collections. She's spoken on some of our key medical works by Vesalius and others at our events. And a tiny plug here, joining the Friends of the University of Sydney Library is free, and members receive invitations to our exhibitions and events programming, as well as their own program of talks and activities centred around our collections. Several years ago, Kate gave a talk to the Friends of the Library on Vesalius and how his work has endured down the centuries. This was when we theoretically added the first edition of the Fabrica to our wish list, of items to acquire, realising the incredible story our collection told so vividly, yet missing the key piece. So in 2023, this copy came onto the market and we were able to purchase it as a birthday present to ourselves to celebrate 60 years in the new Fisher Library building. We made the purchase with the generous support of the Margaret Lundy Fund and the B&A Osborne Book Fund, bequests set up by generous past donors. The medical school at the University of Sydney was Australia's first, founded in 1856. The acquisition of this annotated copy of the Fabrica ties into our university's history and proud tradition of teaching exceptional medical professionals. So that's how the Fabrica came into our collections. Let me now introduce you to its author, Andreas Vesalius. Andries van Wezel, Latinized as Andreas Vesalius, as was common at that time, was born in 1514 in Brussels, then part of the Habsburg Netherlands. Following his great-grandfather, his grandfather and his father, Vesalius decided on a career in medicine and studied at the universities of Paris and Leuven, learning the theories of Galen, the famous 2nd century Roman and Greek physician, surgeon and philosopher. Considered to be one of the most accomplished of all medical researchers of antiquity, Galen influenced the development of various scientific disciplines, including anatomy, physiology, pathology, pharmacology, and neurology, as well as philosophy and logic. Galen's understanding of anatomy and medicine was principally influenced by the then current theory of the 4 humours: black bile, yellow bile, blood, and phlegm. Galen's views dominated and influenced Western medical science for more than 1,300 years. His anatomical reports were apparently at first based mainly on the dissection of Barbary apes, as dissection of humans was strictly forbidden in the Roman Empire. As Galen discovered that the facial expressions of the Barbary apes were particularly vivid, he switched to pigs for his research to avoid prosecution. Aristotle had used pigs centuries earlier for his study of anatomy and physiology. Galen, like others, reasoned that animal anatomy had a strong consilience or similarity in principles with that of humans. It was during his time studying Galen's theories in Paris that Vesalius developed an interest in anatomy and was apparently often found examining excavated bones in the charnel houses at the Cemetery of the Innocents, the oldest and largest cemetery in Paris until the late 18th century. He is said to have constructed his first skeleton by stealing from a gibbet, and you can see a reproduction of one that existed in Paris on the right. He must have been an impressive medical student, as he was offered the chair of surgery and anatomy at the University of Padua on the day of his graduation. Prior to taking up his position in Padua, Vesalius guest lectured at the University of Bologna and the University of Pisa. He travelled through Italy and assisted the future Pope Paul IV and Ignatius of Loyola to heal those afflicted by leprosy. In Venice, he met the illustrator Johann von Kalkar, who was a student of Titian, the famous Italian Renaissance painter. Vesalius also worked with the printer, Operinus, on the printing of his doctoral thesis, and we'll hear more about Operinus and van Kalkar later. As a teaching professor, Vesalius created a set of 6 large anatomical woodcut posters, which served as a visual aid for his students during dissections, depicting the human body. Previously, these topics had been taught primarily by a medical doctor reading from classical texts, mainly Galen, with an animal dissection being performed by a barber surgeon, as the doctor was not expected to perform manual labour. No attempt was made to confirm Galen's claims, which were considered unassailable. Vesalius, in contrast, performed dissection as the primary teaching tool to illustrate the topics under discussion during his lectures, handling the actual work himself and urging students to perform dissection themselves. He considered hands-on observation to be the only reliable resource. On the bottom left, you can see the dissection theatre at the University of Padua, as it still exists today, and above is a reproduction of Vesalius undertaking the dissection of a cadaver. Unlike Galen, Vesalius was able to procure a steady supply of human cadavers for dissection. In 1539, a judge at the Padua Criminal Court had been interested in Vesalius's work and had agreed to regularly supply him with the cadavers of executed criminals. Realizing his illustrations were being widely copied, Vesalius published them with the illustrator von Kalkar in 1538 as Tabulae Anatomicae Sex, or 6 anatomical tables. They included the portal, carval, and arterial systems, with 3 of them drawn by Vesalius himself and the others by von Kalkar. You can see a selection here, but unfortunately I'm not sure which ones are which. In 1543, Vesalius conducted a public dissection of the body of Jakob Karre von Geweiler, a notorious felon from the city of Basel in Switzerland. He assembled and articulated the bones and donated the skeleton to the University of Basel. It's the world's oldest surviving anatomical preparation, and it's still displayed at the Anatomical Museum of the University of Basel. And here he is. You can see he's got some losses, but he's survived pretty well down the centuries. In that same year, 1543, his pivotal work was published, De Humani Corporis Fabrica Libri Septem, on the fabric of the human body in 7 books, which he dedicated to Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor. It was a major advance in the history of anatomy over the long dominant work of Galen, and Vesalius did not hesitate to present it as such. Vesalius was 28 years old when the Fabrica was published. In his preface, he describes his disappointing experiences as a student in Paris and Louvain, stating his intention to reform the teaching of anatomy by giving in this book a complete description of the study of the human body, thereby drawing attention to, and I quote, the falsity of Galen's pronouncements. Overall, Vesalius's use of human corpses in dissection allowed him to rectify approximately 300 of Galen's errors in the Fabrica, and I'll touch on some in a moment. The Fabrica, as Vesalius's magnum opus, represents a careful examination of the organs and the complete structure of the human body. This would not have been possible without the many advances that had been made during the Renaissance, including artistic developments in literal visual representation and the technical developments of printing with refined woodcuts. Because of these developments and his careful, immediate involvement, Vesalius was able to produce illustrations superior to any produced previously. It has over 250 detailed woodblock illustrations, which are attributed either to Johann von Kalkar, who we see on the left, who provided drawings for Vesalius's earlier tracts, or more often by modern scholars to the more general studio of Titian in Venice, rather than just von Kalkar, as it's considered unlikely that a single artist created all 273 illustrations in such a short period of time. The woodcuts, carved into pear tree wood, were greatly superior to the illustrations in other anatomical atlases of the day. On the right, you can see an example of carved woodblock and the image it makes. This is not from the Fabrica, but gives you an idea of the consummate skill involved in sketching the images from Vesalius's dissections and reproducing them in exquisite detail by carving them into blocks of wood. Venice was the publishing centre of Europe at the time, but instead of publishing the Fabrica there, Vesalius chose to transport the woodcut blocks on an arduous journey over the Alps to Basel in Switzerland, to be published by one of the foremost printers of the time, Johannes Operinus. Apart from the fact that he had already worked with Operinus to print his thesis, why did he do this? One reason was the challenge of geography. If Vesalius were to have his book printed in Venice, it may have been close to many academic centres like Padua, but distributing copies to Northern Europe would have required dangerous and expensive trips over the Alps. Secondly, in the early 16th century, publishing had come under increased scrutiny, meaning stringent laws and regulations were passed. If Vesalius were to have his book printed in Venice, it would have been subject to this scrutiny and censorship. And lastly, piracy or plagiarism. Just 3 years after its first printing, woodcuts from the Tabulae, his first publication, were published in 5 cities across the Holy Roman Empire. Vesalius was not credited for the reprints and received no revenue for their sales. The Swiss Confederation established independence from the Holy Roman Empire in 1499, and Basel was a safer place of publication. So, for the aforementioned reasons, Vesalius chose to send the woodblocks over the Alps to Operinus in Basel for publication. Johannes Operinus was a Swiss humanist, a teacher, printer, and publisher. After teaching for some time, he enrolled at the University of Basel, where he studied law and Hebrew, while simultaneously working as a proofer in the workshop of Johann Froben, the most important printer of Basel in the early 16th century. Froben was a close friend of Erasmus and cooperated closely with Hans Holbein the Younger. He made Basel one of the world's leading centres of the book trade. In addition to working with Froben, Operinus taught at the Basel Latin School and was temporarily famulus, or assistant, to the physician Paracelsus. He held the chair of Greek language at the University of Basel, and in 1542 he resigned his academic post to devote himself full-time to his printing workshop. He also completed medical studies, so with his wide-ranging expertise in medicine, language, and printing, he was an ideal collaborator for Vesalius. Here we can see Operinus on the left, and on the right is his printer's device, showing the mythological lyre player Arion of Lesbos, supported by a dolphin in the sea. Printers' devices were symbols used as trademarks by printers starting in the 15th century, and were commonly found on the title page or colophon of the editions they printed. A colophon, if you're not aware, is a brief statement containing information about the publication of a book and is usually found at the end. The dolphin's rescue of Arion in Operinus's Mark symbolises divine intervention and the triumph of art and courage over adversity. It also includes a quote from Ovid's Metamorphoses, further emphasising the themes of valour and overcoming obstacles. The quote, "In via virtuti nulla est via," translates to "valour knows no obstacles." The image we can see here is taken from our copy, and you can also see handwriting added around and below the printer's mark. These notes belong to the first owner of the book, and I'll talk about him shortly. Just a word of warning here, some of the plates that I will show can be a little gruesome to some, so apologies if anyone's a bit squeamish. Undoubtedly, the most important element of De Humani Corporis Fabrica were the illustrations. With 273 woodcuts displaying intricate, never-before-seen details of the human skeletal and muscular systems, the artwork was paramount. Under his own expense and supervision, Vesalius shipped the blocks over Gotthard Pass to Basel on muleback, a journey of several weeks with the constant possibility of damage. But for Vesalius, the journey was worth it, to have his magnum opus published at the highest possible quality. Vesalius gave Operinus specific instructions on where the illustrations should be placed within the text and how they should relate to the surrounding content. This ensured that the illustrations served as integral visual aids and enhanced the understanding of the text, rather than being haphazardly included as secondary to the text or decorative additions. Incidentally, to accompany the Fabrica, Vesalius published a condensed and less expensive version, De Humani Corporis Fabrica Librorum Epitome, or abridgment on the fabric of the human body. The Epitome had a stronger focus on illustrations than on text to help readers, including medical students, to easily understand his findings. It contained 8 anatomical engravings that condensed visual material from the Fabrica, 1 illustration of the human skeleton taken directly from the Fabrica, and 2 new woodcut plates. An important feature of the copy of the first edition of the Fabrica that we purchased is its provenance, or previous ownership. This book is in its original binding from the 1500s. It's a German binding, pigskin, with incredible blind tooling detail. In this image, the book is resting on its modern, custom-made purple box, upon which you see a gold-tooled year of publication, 1543. Gold tooling is a common decorative technique in bookbinding where metal tools are heated and pressed into or rolled along gold leaf laid atop of the dampened leather covering of the boards, melding the gold to the leather. Blind tooling uses the same application of heated decorative tools onto the leather but without the gold leaf. The metal clasps, fully functional, also are retained. Metal clasps are a relic from manuscript production before the advent of books printed using movable type with Gutenberg in the mid-15th century. Manuscripts were commonly written on parchment instead of paper. Parchment is animal skin stretched and dried to produce a smooth, durable surface suitable for writing, but it's highly hygroscopic, meaning that it reacts strongly to changes in atmospheric moisture, expanding and contracting very strongly. Medieval binders of handwritten manuscripts commonly used clasps on books to keep the parchment leaves under pressure when not in use, so they wouldn't cockle and swell, helping the book to retain its shape. After mechanized printing and advances in paper making, printed books on paper became the norm, but they retained many visual features of manuscripts as defining characteristics of what people expected a normal book looked like. Hence, the clasps on this book, printed almost a century after the Gutenberg Bible. It's unusual for a book of this age to have its original binding survive intact, and we can see that it's stamped with the first owner's initials, German physician and university professor Caspar Neef, who lived 1514 to 1579. And you might just be able to make out the C and N with some floral devices on the same line, and then the letter M, which most likely was for medic, as he was a medical doctor, and there he is. There is evidence throughout our copy that Neef consulted this book extensively throughout his career as a medical practitioner. His meticulous and detailed annotations are found throughout, carefully responding to the text and the illustrations. Additionally, another nice feature is that all anatomical illustrations and decorative initials up to page 165 have been carefully painted by a contemporary hand. We don't know who, it could be Neef, it could be someone else. Having the extensive annotations of a contemporary physician is an incredible opportunity for an academic to research how he was responding to Vesalius's groundbreaking and unorthodox views, and it's an important part of why we went with this particular copy. From Caspar Neef, we don't know whose hands the book passed through until we pick up the trail again centuries later. This volume was part of a large private medical collection formed in the early 20th century by the Innsbruck pharmacist and pharmaceutical historian Ludwig Winkler. So let's have a look at the content. Here is the frontispiece, which is a full-page illustration, usually facing the title page. It depicts a dramatic scene of a public dissection taking place in a neoclassical amphitheatre. It shows Vesalius performing an autopsy on a female cadaver, surrounded by a crowd of onlookers and various figures. The frontispiece is a visual representation of Vesalius's revolutionary approach to anatomy, moving beyond the reliance on animal dissections and Galen's theories to a more accurate and detailed study of human anatomy based on first-hand observations. They say a picture takes 1,000 words, and this picture was intended to tell a very detailed story. So firstly, Vesalius is prominently featured front and centre, performing the dissection, emphasising his role as the central figure in this new approach to anatomy. The Vesalius family crest is seen at the top, featuring 3 weasels. The surname Vesalius is derived from the Latin word for weasel. The scene is set in a Palladian-style wooden theatre, a public space where the dissection is open to all, representing the accessibility and openness of Vesalius's teaching. The body being dissected is that of a woman executed for a crime, with the autopsy serving to confirm her claim of being pregnant. This emphasises the practical purpose of dissection in resolving real-life legal and medical questions. The crowd includes various figures, some in classical attire, possibly representing figures like Galen, Hippocrates, and Aristotle, suggesting a tension between Vesalius's new approach and the authority of classical medical texts. The scene features anatomical tools and a sponge, highlighting the instruments used in the dissection. The skeleton above Vesalius emphasises the importance of skeletal anatomy, whilst the dog and monkey marginalised in the bottom corners represent animals often used in dissection up to this point. And finally, 2 menials are shown arguing over the dissecting instruments, reflecting the changing role of these figures in the medical sphere, with Vesalius's teaching shifting the focus to medical professionals. So the frontispiece can be seen as a sophisticated visual manifesto of the new approach to anatomy pioneered by Vesalius, marking a shift from relying on animal dissections and Galen's theories to direct observation and detailed anatomical illustrations. An amusing feature of the volume is the historiated initials. They are enlarged and decorative initials that incorporate scenes or illustrations. These initials are not just decorative, but they tell stories. In this work, they often depict scenes relating to medicine, anatomy, and sometimes mythology. The book contains both larger and smaller historiated initials, with some depicting cherubs or putti engaged in dissection, surgery, or other anatomical activities. The feature of historiated initials is another throwback to medieval manuscripts, which were produced per colla et comata. This is a Latin phrase meaning by clauses and phrases. In the context of writing, it refers to a system of text layout where each clause or phrase begins on a new line, improving readability, particularly for oral reading. This method was used in manuscripts, especially in the early Middle Ages, before more standardised punctuation systems were developed. A hierarchy of sizes of capital letters for the new passages helped medieval readers to navigate through the text, and these enlarged initials were filled with scenes related to the text as another visual aid, as well as a highly ornamental feature. So you may not be able to see, the image quality is not fantastic, but the large O, top left, features medical putti putting a skull into boiling water to cook away remaining soft tissue. The large Q, top centre, putti vivisecting a pig on a table. The T on the top right, putti are hoisting the body of a small mammal, perhaps a dog, by its rear legs. The A, bottom left, some putti are restraining a patient while others prepare to catheterise him. He is suffering from retention of urine. The C, bottom middle, 3 men lower a perforated cask into a stream, where it will stay until the moving water strips the tissue away from the bones of a partially dissected cadaver. This method of preparing a skeleton is described in the Fabrica. And the D, bottom right, Putty used a saw to cut away the bone at the top of the head in preparation for dissection of the brain. The result of this cutting is also illustrated in Book 7 of the Fabrica. So Vesalius arranged the Fabrica into 7 books, or what we would today call chapters, as they were all bound in one volume. Book 1 was the bones and cartilage. Book 2, the ligaments and muscles. Book 3, veins and arteries. 4, the nerves. 5, organs of nutrition and generation. 6, the heart and associated organs. And Book 7, the brain. The Fabrica serves as a dissection manual as well as an anatomical atlas. This illustration depicts all the tools required for practical dissection, according to Vesalius. Doctors carrying out dissections today would use many of the same tools: forceps, scalpels, rib spreaders, wires and strings for cutting and stitching the body. The first book in the Fabrica, on bones and cartilage, is the largest, taking up about a quarter of the volume. It contains his observations about the appearance and function of each of the human bones, plus cartilage. His skeletons are shown in allegorical contrapposto poses, drawing on existing artistic conventions and religious iconography. Contrapposto is an Italian visual arts term that describes a human figure in a natural pose with most of their weight concentrated on one leg. And a famous example is Michelangelo's statue of David, as seen on the left. And allegory, referring to the skeleton's poses, can be interpreted to reveal a hidden meaning, typically a moral or a spiritual one. Here, the skeleton is in a typical contrapposto pose, digging his own grave with a shovel. The skeleton, bent over with its head in its hands, imitates figures in contemporary paintings on the Lamentation of Christ, evidencing sorrow or grief. And the image I chose, the woman is over on the far right-hand side, that you can see there. The skeleton mimics her posture. That is The Descent from the Cross, which is a panel painting by the Flemish artist Rogier van der Weyden, created in 1435 and now in the Museo del Prado in Madrid. The intellectual lamenting skeleton recalls memento mori, or vanities portraits, in which the person contemplates, with the aid of a skull or a flower, the brevity of life. The Latin inscription on the tomb beneath him reads, "Genius lives forever, everything else will die," which perhaps echoes Vesalius's intention in writing De Fabrica. And here you can see a typical memento mori painting, St. Jerome in his study by Jura, painted in 1521. And this is now at the Museo Nacional de Arte Antiga in Lisbon. Vesalius believed that the skeletal system was the framework of the human body. It was in this opening book of the Fabrica that he made several of his strongest claims against Galen's theories. In his extensive study of the skull, Vesalius claimed that the mandible consisted of one bone, whereas Galen had thought it to be 2 separate bones. Vesalius also accurately described the vestibule in the interior of the temporal bone of the skull. In Galen's observation of the ape, he had discovered that the sternum consisted of 7 parts, which he assumed also held true for humans. Vesalius discovered that the human sternum consisted of only 3 parts. He also disproved the common belief that men had 1 fewer rib than women, and noted that the tibia and fibula bones of the leg were indeed larger than the humerus bone of the arm, unlike Galen's original findings. In Book 2, Vesalius describes the structure of the muscles, the agents used in creating movement by the body, and the materials used to hold the joints together. Through his observations of butchers cutting meat, He was able to incorporate the skills they used in his dissection of the human body. The order in which to dissect a human body to effectively observe each muscle in the body is laid out. Each illustration displays a deepening view of the human body, which can be followed whilst dissecting. He also mentions how Galen's anatomical descriptions do not match his own observations. In order to show respect to Galen, he suggests that Galen's use of anatomical structures is in fact correct, but not for humans. The illustrations that accompany the text in this book have become known as the muscle men. He describes the source and position of each muscle of the body and provides information on their respective operation. Vesalius expressed a hope that his work would prove useful for the painter, the sculptor, and the moulder, as well as for doctors, by helping to show how the muscles contracted and expanded in motion. Alongside discussions on anatomical structure and function, Vesalius included anecdotes about his experience of grave robbing. This illustration shows a dissected corpse held up by a rope strung through the eye sockets, a technique used by Vesalius in his lectures. It was easier for crowds to see the body this way than if it was lying on a table. Nailed on the wall behind is the diaphragm, a muscle of the abdomen. Another curious fact about the muscle men illustrations is that they are depicted on a background that is thought to be the landscape surrounding Padua, where Vesalius taught medicine. If pieced together, the plates of the muscle men seen from behind feature backgrounds which form a connecting landscape. Vesalius's work on the vascular and circulatory systems were arguably his greatest contribution to modern medicine. In his dissections of the heart, Vesalius became convinced that Galen's claims of a porous intraventricular septum were false, believing that the septum was indeed waterproof, discovering and naming the mitral valve to explain the blood flow. Vesalius correctly believed that cardiac systole, the phase where the heart muscles contract, is synchronous with the arterial pulse. He verified Estienne's findings on the valves of the hepatic veins, which are blood vessels in the liver that drain oxygen-poor blood into the inferior vena cava, a major vein returning deoxygenated blood from the lower body into the heart. They are crucial for removing processed blood from the liver. He also described the azygos vein, and apologies to any doctors in the audience, I'm probably mangling the pronunciation, which carries blood from the back of your chest and abdomen to your heart. And he discovered the canal which passes into the fetus between the umbilical vein and the vena cava. This image shows the intricate network of veins in a human body. No one before Vesalius had attempted to trace the human vein and arterial system in such detail. Representing the veins with such accuracy was important because of bloodletting, a common practice of the time, where blood was taken from a person to supposedly improve their health. Shading was used to indicate the veins at the back or those hidden from view, making the image appear three-dimensional. Determined to understand the functions of the brain, Vesalius investigated a long-standing theory that the organ produced a substance called animal spirit, which flowed from the brain through hollow nerves to the rest of the body, governing feeling and movement. Vesalius challenged these ideas, showing that there was no physical outlet through the skull for such a liquid to flow. Vesalius referred to waterways and plumbing systems to describe his theories about the function of the brain. There's not time to list the over 300 errors of contemporary medical belief that Vesalius was able to refute in this work, but he certainly also disproved Galen's assertion that men had more teeth than women. He believed that the brain and the nervous system are the centre of the mind and emotion, in contrast to the common belief originating from Aristotle that the heart was the centre of the emotions. He correspondingly believed that nerves themselves do not originate from the heart, but from the brain. facts already experimentally proved by anatomists Herophilius and Erasistratus in the classical era, but suppressed after the adoption of Aristotle's theories by the Catholic Church in the Middle Ages. After the publication of the Fabrica, most of the woodblocks were stored and then reused in the second edition of 1555, and many were used again and again for over a century. The history of the blocks and their movements over the centuries is outlined by the American neurosurgeon Harvey Cushing in his 1943 book, A Biobibliography of Andreas Vesalius. In 1893 and again in 1932, the majority of the woodblocks were rediscovered in Munich at the University Library, having apparently been transferred there when the university was moved from Ingolstadt to Munich in the 19th century. A large and beautiful volume was printed in 1934 to 35 from those original woodblocks as a joint project of the New York Academy of Medicine and the Library of the University of Munich. 227 of the original 277 illustrations from the Fabrica and the Epitome appear, with the remaining 50 illustrations being reproduced photographically. We are fortunate to also hold a copy of this limited edition from 1934 with just 615 copies being printed. Sadly, after this 1934 publication, the original woodblocks were destroyed during World War II bombing. But back to the 16th century, Vesalius's Fabrica became an instant success, and its illustrations were quickly copied in other publications, often in a less precise and artistic way. The lack of robust copyright laws in the early modern period made it difficult for Vesalius to protect his work. The Spanish anatomist Valverde's Anatomia del Corpo Humano, published in 1556, is a clear example of direct plagiarism, with illustrations directly copied from Vesalius's work. Valverde's work was published 13 years after the publication of the Fabrica and contained 42 copperplate engravings. Of these, only 4 were original to Valverde. The rest were almost direct copies of Vesalius's earlier images. If you look at these stylized depictions of the muscles, you can see that Valverde, the image on the right, simplified the background and made minor adjustments to the human figure, but it's clearly modelled on Vesalius's work, which is the left image. And another fact is that when you copy an image, it reverses in layout, so that's another very clear indication. If you look closely at the frontispiece of the Fabrica, you can see a small cartouche at the very bottom in yellow that contains a few lines of text beginning with cum quisare. This text lists the various privileges that accompanied the Fabrica's printing, one from the Holy Roman Emperor, Quisare, one from the King of France, Galliarum Regis, and one from the Venetian Senate, Senatus Veneti. These privileges protected the Fabrica from plagiarism in areas controlled by these rulers. The problem with privileges was that they were only applicable in the regions where they were issued. While Vesalius was protected in the Empire, France, and Venice, he had no defence against plagiarised editions that were published in other areas. Because Valverde's Anatomia was printed in Rome, a city where Vesalius did not have a privilege, there was nothing he could do about it, no matter how much he would have liked to. And for example, another example, Vesalius's famous image of the skeleton digging his own grave later appeared in Peter Lowe's A Discourse of the Whole Art of Chirurgery. When the two images are placed side by side, the image on the right comes from Lowe's third edition in 1634, and Vesalius on the left, it's immediately apparent that Lowe's images is of a much poorer quality. So in conclusion, whilst plagiarism was detrimental to Vesalius's work, it also contributed to the spread of his ideas and illustrations, demonstrating the significant impact of his work on medical illustration. Imitation is truly the sincerest form of flattery. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jude. That was sensational, and I think it does live up to the comment that this is probably the most famous, most important book ever written, and certainly the genius of Vesalius is just amazing. Any questions?
Thank you for that brilliant talk and the superb illustrations. The best I've ever seen, I think. I might have done better in second year anatomy at Sydney Medical School if I had that sitting on my desk.
Indeed.
Is it implied to ask how much you had to pay, the university had to pay for it?
People always ask that, but we don't discuss the financial value of collection items, and that's a security issue, but also they're not purchased as a financial investment and they'll never leave our collections. And instead we prefer to recognise their immense academic and cultural value. So I'll decline to comment further on that. A lot, I'll say. It's a significant item for any collector of medical works. It's huge, probably the most significant.
How many copies are still in existence?
I believe there was an academic at Cambridge doing a census some years back, and I think he was counting in the relatively high 200s, maybe 277.
And how many did he print?
That's a good question. I might have to get back to you on that. I'm not sure. That is a pivotal piece of information that I neglected to bring with me. It wouldn't have been a high amount because the cost would have been prohibitive because of the high quality. It would have been common maybe to print 500 copies, something like that. So, but interestingly, if 277 or thereabouts remain, when we purchased this copy, it was not known about or counted in this census. So this is a new copy for academia, which is also exciting.
Julie, did the book cover both male and female aspects, or was it mainly?
It was mostly male, and that is due to the fact that he was using criminals' bodies, and there were very few female criminals. So
the other question is that it was obviously such a revolution. What sort of reaction did he get from the authorities, like the church or the medical establishment? Were they sort of hostile to?
I think initial response was shock and outrage, but the clear, undeniable truth of his work meant that his ideas were very, very quickly taken up and swept away a lot of the thinking that had been used in medical teaching up until that point. So it was almost an overnight success. Yeah.
How do you store it?
Very carefully. We have high security rooms in the library. So security is one aspect. Environmental conditions are another. So we maintain not a constant temperature and humidity, but a constant range within which we try not to deviate. As fluctuations in temperature and humidity are more damaging than slightly high or slightly low. So we're trying to avoid warm and moist conditions where mold can grow and insects are more likely to be encouraged. And if it's too dry, that can increase the desiccation or the embrittlement of the paper and other materials. So a happy medium is somewhere around 20 to 25 degrees and 40 to 50% relative humidity. We undertake a whole range of activities, monitoring the environment, checking for pests, cleaning, security. We place key items in special archival housing made with materials that are safe to be in direct contact, so they won't off gas or become brittle or stain or fade or do anything nasty to the items that they're housing. So yeah, a whole range of activities. Yes?
Do you know much about the provenance of the body before it came into the university's hands?
Well, I mentioned the original owner, Caspar Neef, and we're fortunate to have his annotations throughout the book, so that's waiting for a scholar of the history of medicine to come along and study how he responded to Vesalius's ideas. But we do know, we purchased it at auction, and the auction house purchased it from a private medical library in Brussels, I think. So it had been there for several generations. But between there's a big stretch of unknown, and that's often the case with rare books. Documentation can be lost, or it wasn't considered important at the time to keep, so quite often the trail goes cold in the middle years.
Well, again, Julie, thank you so much for introducing that treasure to us. And to know it's just only 2.5 kilometres away from us for a few minutes. It's great to know that. And thanks also for the introduction to become friends of the Fisher Library. I think that's a great suggestion. So on behalf of you all, we really thank Julie for being with us this afternoon.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. And lastly, I'll say,